The moment Ethan switched the shampoo bottle, he wasn't trying to spy. He wasn't trying to trap anyone. He was just a tired husband standing in his own bathroom, unaware that a harmless decision was about to expose a betrayal so calculated, so cruel, it would shatter everything he believed about love. That night, as he watched his wife smile like nothing was wrong, an unbearable injustice settled in his chest. She had been living a double life, while he had been loving her honestly, faithfully, blindly. What began with a scent that didn't belong soon unraveled into secrets, lies, and a truth far darker than he was ready to face. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's about how the smallest details reveal the biggest betrayals, and how healing begins only after everything falls apart. Before we dive into the full story, take a moment to comment where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the powerful stories coming next. Ethan Cole never imagined that a marriage could begin to unravel over something as ordinary as a shampoo bottle. On the surface, his life looked quiet, stable, even enviable. A modest house in a peaceful neighborhood, a steady job that paid the bills, and a wife he had loved with a kind of devotion that left no room for doubt. He believed in routine. He believed in trust. And more than anything, he believed that love, once chosen, was something you protected even when it wasn't exciting anymore. The night everything began, he was standing barefoot on the cold bathroom tiles, half asleep, reaching for his usual shampoo. The bottle was empty. Without thinking, he grabbed the one next to it. Same brand, same color, same bathroom shelf it had always been on. He didn't know that this tiny, insignificant choice was the first crack in a wall that would soon collapse entirely. When the warm water hit his hair, the scent stopped him. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right either. It was sharper, cleaner. Not the familiar soft fragrance he associated with his wife, Lena. The smell lingered in a way that felt foreign, intrusive, like a stranger standing too close. Ethan frowned, rinsed his hair, and told himself he was overthinking. People change products all the time. Scents fade, memories distort. That was the kind of logic he had always trusted. Still, something followed him out of the bathroom that night. Not the scent, but the feeling, the quiet, creeping sense that something in his home no longer belonged to him. Lena was already in bed, scrolling on her phone, her face lit by the screen's glow. She smiled when he walked in, the same smile he had fallen in love with years ago. Warm, effortless, convincing. Ethan climbed into bed beside her, kissed her temple, and lay staring at the ceiling long after she fell asleep. In the darkness, the injustice of it all began to press on his chest, though he couldn't yet name why. He was a man who showed up, who listened, who stayed, and yet, lately, he had felt like a guest in his own marriage. Conversations ended quicker, touches felt shorter, and now even the air in his bathroom felt unfamiliar. The next morning, Ethan noticed something else. The shampoo bottle he had used was placed back exactly where it had been before. Perfectly aligned, deliberately returned. Lena never did that. She was careless with small things. Always had been. The detail gnawed at him. Not loudly, but persistently. Like a slow drip in the back of his mind, he wanted to ask her. He almost did. But years of loving her had trained him to doubt himself before he ever doubted her. Instead, he said nothing and left for work, carrying the weight of an unspoken question. Over the following days, Ethan began noticing more changes, small, deniable things. Lena took longer showers. She guarded her phone more closely. She laughed at messages she didn't explain. None of it was proof. All of it was unsettling. And through it all, she remained kind, attentive, almost too careful, as if performing the role of a devoted wife instead of living it. That was when the mystery took shape. Ethan didn't want to become suspicious. He didn't want to turn into a man who searched for reasons to be hurt. But the feeling wouldn't let him go. Something was happening in the quiet spaces of their life. the places where truth usually lived. And whatever it was, it had already crossed a line he didn't yet understand. He stood in the bathroom one evening, staring at the two nearly identical shampoo bottles, and felt a strange resolve settle in. He wasn't angry. He wasn't vengeful. He was simply tired of not knowing. With a steady hand, he switched their positions on the shelf. A harmless act, a meaningless one. Or so it seemed. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that small switch would expose patterns, lies, and a betrayal that had been unfolding right under his nose. It would force him to see his wife, not as the woman he loved, but as someone capable of deception he never believed she had in her. And it would push him into a role he never wanted, the man who had to investigate his own marriage to survive the truth. This story isn't about obsession or paranoia. It's about how trust erodes quietly, how injustice can hide behind a smile, and how the smallest details often carry the loudest truths. What started with a scent would soon lead Ethan down a path of discovery that would cost him his innocence, but ultimately give him something far more valuable: clarity. Before the story goes any further, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if you're ready for a story about betrayal, truth, and healing that goes deeper than it first appears, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Ethan had always believed that a good marriage was built on quiet certainty. Not fireworks, not constant passion, but the steady comfort of knowing who you came home to every night. For years, that belief had carried him through long workdays, unpaid bills, and the slow dulling of romance that came with routine. He never questioned it. He never questioned Lena. They had met in their late 20s, both tired of shallow connections and temporary affection. Lena had been magnetic from the start, confident without trying, warm but guarded, the kind of woman who made people lean in when she spoke. Ethan, on the other hand, was never the loudest presence in a room. He listened more than he talked. He noticed details. He remembered small things. That contrast had worked beautifully at first. She brought color into his life. He brought stability into hers. Their home reflected that balance. Neutral walls softened by Lena's artwork, orderly shelves offset by her careless piles of books and clothes. The bathroom, especially, was a shared space of unspoken routines. 2 toothbrushes, 2 towels, 2 shampoo bottles that had always stayed exactly where they were. Ethan had never thought about it before. He had never needed to. Lately, though, the house felt different. Not colder, just quieter, like something important had left without announcing itself. Ethan noticed how Lena's laughter no longer reached her eyes the way it used to. How she kissed him distractedly, already halfway somewhere else. He noticed how she started locking the bathroom door when she showered, something she had never done before. None of it was dramatic, none of it was enough to accuse, but together they formed a pattern that made his chest tighten, with a familiar, unwelcome feeling being replaced without being told. He told himself it was stress. Lena's job had become demanding. She worked late more often, came home mentally exhausted, her mind still tangled in meetings and deadlines. Ethan tried to be supportive. He cooked more, asked fewer questions, gave her space. He believed that love meant adapting, even when it hurt. But adaptation didn't stop the distance from growing. The night after he switched the shampoo bottles, Ethan lay awake, listening to the sound of Lena breathing beside him. It was steady, peaceful. She slept easily, as if nothing in her life was out of place. He wondered how someone could sleep so soundly while carrying secrets. The thought felt unfair, almost cruel. He was the one lying awake with doubts, while she rested comfortably in whatever truth she had chosen for herself. The next morning, Ethan watched her get ready for work. He stood in the doorway as she brushed her hair, her movements automatic, practiced. When she reached for the shampoo bottle in the shower later, he didn't see it, but he noticed the pause. Just a fraction of a second. A hesitation so small it could be dismissed by anyone who wasn't already looking for it. That pause stayed with him all day. At work, Ethan found it impossible to focus. Numbers blurred on his screen, emails went unread, His thoughts kept circling back to the bathroom shelf, to the scent that didn't belong, to the way Lena's hand had hovered before making its choice. He hated himself for noticing, hated that he was becoming observant in a way that felt like betrayal of his own values. When he got home that evening, Lena wasn't there. She had texted earlier, saying she'd be late again. Ethan cooked dinner for one, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on him. He ate slowly, mechanically, barely tasting the food. This was their life. Now separate schedules, brief overlaps, shared space without shared presence. Later, when Lena finally returned, she looked tired but oddly energized. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. Ethan caught a faint trace of a scent as she passed him in the hallway. The same unfamiliar sharpness, the same wrongness. He wanted to ask where she'd been. He wanted to ask why she smelled different. He wanted to ask if he was losing his mind or his marriage. Instead, he asked if she'd eaten. She smiled and said she wasn't hungry. That night, Ethan stood in the bathroom again, staring at the shampoo bottles like they were evidence in a crime scene. He hadn't planned to do anything more. The switch was supposed to be a one-time thing, a way to reassure himself that nothing was wrong. But reassurance didn't come. What came instead was confirmation of a fear he hadn't been ready to name. The bottle he had moved was nearly empty. It didn't make sense. Lena showered daily, sometimes twice. If she had been using that bottle consistently, it should have been much fuller. The realization hit him slowly, sinking into his chest like a stone. She wasn't using the same shampoo every time. She was choosing differently depending on where she was. Ethan felt his throat tighten. This wasn't about hygiene. This was about intention, about compartmentalization, about a woman who lived two versions of her life and carefully selected which version she presented depending on who was watching. He leaned against the sink, his reflection staring back at him, older than he felt, more tired than he remembered being. He looked like a man who had given everything and was now being asked to accept less than nothing in return. The injustice of it burned quietly. He had been faithful without question. He had built his life around her, and somewhere along the way, she had stepped outside of that life without having the courage to let him go. Ethan didn't cry. He didn't rage. What settled over him instead was something colder and more dangerous clarity. If Lena was capable of this level of deception, then the truth would not reveal itself willingly. It would have to be uncovered. And so, without fully admitting it to himself, Ethan made a choice. He would keep watching, keep listening, keep noticing the details she thought were invisible. He would follow the trail she had unknowingly left behind. Not because he wanted to destroy her, but because he needed to understand what had already destroyed them. From that point on, the bathroom stopped being just a room. It became a place Ethan visited with intention. His senses sharpened in a way he had never experienced before. Every morning, every night, he found himself glancing at the shelf, at the sink, at the small, ordinary objects that now carried an unbearable weight. The shampoo bottles sat there quietly, innocent-looking, as if they weren't slowly teaching him how carefully his wife curated her secrets. Ethan began to notice how Lena moved in that space. She used to wander into the bathroom without thinking, humming softly, brushing her teeth while talking to him about her day. Now, she closed the door more often. When she didn't, she positioned her body just enough to block his view. It was subtle, calculated, and that calculation hurt more than any outright lie could have. One morning, he heard the shower turn on before he had fully woken up. The sound of water rushing against tile filled the apartment, steady and familiar. Ethan stayed in bed, eyes open, heart strangely alert. He listened, not because he wanted to catch her doing something wrong, but because some part of him was desperate to catch her doing something right, to prove his doubts were misplaced. When Lena came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she leaned down and kissed his forehead. Her lips were warm. Her smile was easy, but the scent that followed her wasn't the one he associated with their shared mornings. It was sharper again, cleaner, almost masculine in its simplicity. "You're up early," she said lightly. "Couldn't sleep." Ethan replied. She nodded, as if that made sense, as if insomnia were now a shared condition in their marriage. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask if he was okay. She simply moved on, getting dressed, checking her phone, slipping back into the rhythm of a life that no longer fully included him. Later that day, after Lena left for work, Ethan returned to the bathroom. He told himself he was just tidying up. That's what he always told himself now. He picked up the shampoo bottle she had used that morning and turned it over in his hands. The label was different, slightly worn, as if it had been carried in a bag more often than it had sat on a shelf. A travel-sized bottle, disguised among full ones. His stomach tightened. This wasn't carelessness. This was planning. He set the bottle back exactly where he found it, his hands steady, despite the storm forming inside his chest. Ethan understood something then that he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. Lena wasn't hiding something by accident. She was hiding it with precision. That realization changed everything. The days that followed blurred together, marked by small discoveries and quiet confirmations. Lena's showers became predictable in their unpredictability. Some mornings, she smelled like home. Other days, she smelled like somewhere else entirely. And every time, Ethan noted it without comment, his silence becoming a form of self-preservation. At night, when Lena fell asleep beside him, Ethan stared into the darkness and replayed moments from their past, the early years, the laughter, the way she used to look at him like he was the only person in the room. He wondered when that look had faded. He wondered if it had been his fault. Those thoughts were easier to bear than the alternative that she had chosen to leave him emotionally long before he ever noticed. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, Lena laughed at something on her phone. The sound was genuine, unrestrained. It cut through Ethan sharper than anger ever could. "What's funny?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. She glanced up, surprised, then smiled. "Just something from work?" Ethan nodded. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. The answer had been too quick, too polished. Another rehearsed line in a script he was no longer part of. Later that night, he made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He switched the shampoo bottles again, but this time, more deliberately. He marked the inside of one cap with a tiny scratch, something only he would recognize. It felt wrong, intrusive, but it also felt necessary. The next morning confirmed what he already feared. Lena stepped into the shower without hesitation. When she came out, Ethan checked the bottle. The scratched cap was damp, used, his breath caught in his throat. Not because he was shocked, but because the pattern was now undeniable. She used one shampoo at home, another somewhere else, and she was careful enough to track it. That level of awareness didn't exist without a reason. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not anger yet, but resolve. He had spent weeks doubting himself, minimizing his instincts, telling himself that love meant trust even when things felt wrong. But trust, he realized, didn't mean blindness, and love didn't mean accepting deception as the cost of companionship. The bathroom mirror reflected a man he barely recognized. Not broken, not weak, but awake, fully, painfully awake. He understood now that whatever Lena was hiding didn't begin with the shampoo. The shampoo was just the symptom, the visible trace of a life she lived beyond him. A life that smelled different, felt different, and no longer made room for his presence. Ethan washed his hands slowly, grounding himself in the simple act. Water, soap, reality. He didn't know yet who the other person was. He didn't know how long it had been going on, but he knew this. The truth was no longer a question of if, it was only a matter of when. And somewhere, in the quiet routines Lena believed were too small to matter, she had already given herself away. Curiosity, Ethan learned, was not a sudden urge. It was a slow corrosion. It didn't demand answers right away. It simply refused to leave. From the moment he marked the shampoo cap, his mind began working against his will, replaying possibilities, rehearsing explanations, searching for the version of reality that hurt the least. None of them fit. He told himself to stop, to step back, to choose ignorance, if that was what it took to preserve what remained of their marriage. But every time he tried, something small pulled him back, in the way Lena checked her phone before speaking, the way she angled her body away from him when she laughed at messages she didn't share, the way her eyes seemed elsewhere, even when she was standing right in front of him. Ethan had never thought of himself as suspicious. He had always believed that love thrived in openness, not surveillance. Yet now, he felt trapped in a space where not knowing was more painful than knowing too much. And so, against the values he once held without question, he began to watch more closely, not aggressively, not obsessively, just enough to notice. He started paying attention to timing. Lena's showers were no longer random. They followed patterns. On days she came home early, she used the familiar shampoo. On days she worked late, or claimed to, she reached for the other one. The realization settled heavily in his chest, a quiet confirmation that her choices were deliberate, not accidental. One evening, Ethan stood in the kitchen washing dishes while Lena talked on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low, careful. She laughed softly at something he couldn't hear. When she noticed him glance up, she turned her body slightly, creating distance without moving away. Ethan looked back down at the sink, his hands moving automatically, his heart pounding louder than the running water. He hated what this was doing to him. The constant awareness, the way his thoughts circled her movements like a predator he never wanted to become. But more than that, he hated the feeling of being excluded from his own life, of sharing a home with someone who treated truth like a private possession. That night, he lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, listening to Lena's breathing even out beside him. Sleep came easily to her now. It was as if the weight she carried during the day lifted the moment she closed her eyes, leaving him alone with questions she refused to answer. In the darkness, Ethan made another choice. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't fueled by rage. It was quiet, measured, and filled with a kind of sadness that surprised him. He decided he would test the truth one more time, not to trap Lena, but to free himself from doubt. He needed clarity, even if it came at a cost. The next morning, after Lena left for work, Ethan entered the bathroom and switched the shampoo bottles again. This time, he placed the unfamiliar one in the most obvious position, leaving the familiar bottle slightly out of reach. It was subtle, but intentional, a deviation from routine that would only be noticed by someone who was paying close attention. The act made his hands shake. He sat at the kitchen table afterward, staring at his coffee as it went cold, feeling the weight of what he had become. He wasn't proud of himself. He didn't feel clever. He felt desperate. And desperation, he realized, was what betrayal created in the people left behind. When Lena came home that evening, Ethan watched her out of the corner of his eye. She moved through the house with her usual confidence, greeting him warmly, asking about his day. Her normalcy felt surreal, like a performance he had seen too many times to believe. She went into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Ethan waited. The sound of running water filled the apartment. He counted the seconds without meaning to. When the shower stopped, he stood, his heart racing, and walked quietly toward the bathroom. He didn't listen at the door. He didn't need to. He only needed to see the shelf afterward. When Lena emerged, wrapped in a towel, she smiled at him again, but there was something different in her expression. Now a flicker of confusion, quickly masked by composure. "Did you move things around in the bathroom?" she asked lightly. The question landed like a blow. Ethan kept his face neutral. "I cleaned a bit." "Why?" She shrugged too quickly. "Just noticed things were different." The word echoed in his mind. It was the same word he would have used to describe their marriage, now slightly rearranged, subtly altered, but fundamentally no longer what it once was. Later that night, when Lena was asleep, Ethan checked the bottles. The unfamiliar one was wet, used. His breath left him in a slow, controlled exhale. The last thread of doubt snapped quietly. Without drama, there was no shock left to feel, only confirmation. Lena had noticed the change, she had questioned it, and she had still chosen the shampoo that didn't belong to this house. Ethan sat on the edge of the bathtub, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. He didn't feel angry yet. He felt hollow, like something vital had been removed from him without his consent. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about intent. About a woman who lived with one man and prepared herself for another. About a marriage that existed in name, but not in truth. Ethan realized then that whatever came next would change everything. There would be no going back to ignorance, no returning to the comfort of not knowing. He had crossed a line, not into obsession, but into awareness. And awareness, once gained, demanded action. He didn't know yet how he would confront it, or when, or what he would do with the truth once it was fully revealed. But he knew this. The mystery was no longer unfolding around him. It was unfolding through him, and somewhere beyond the walls of his home, someone else was sharing a version of Lena he no longer recognized. By the time Ethan accepted that the shampoo was no longer a coincidence, his world had already shifted into something colder and sharper. He moved through his days with the quiet precision of someone who had learned that comfort was dangerous. Every interaction with Lena now carried a double meaning. Every smile a question, every silence a potential answer he wasn't sure he wanted. What hurt the most wasn't the suspicion itself. It was how easily she continued, how effortlessly she balanced her lives as if nothing had changed. She still asked about his day, still reminded him to take his vitamins, still reached for his hand when they crossed the street. And yet, beneath those familiar gestures, there was a current of deception so smooth it felt practiced. Ethan began noticing the lies, not by what Lena said, but by what she didn't. She stopped mentioning names. Conversations about work became vague, stripped of details that once came naturally. When he asked simple questions, she answered with polished generalities, the kind that sounded reasonable until you realized they said nothing at all. One night, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Lena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and flipped it face down instantly. Too fast, too intentional. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. She smiled. "Yeah, just work stuff." The words were light, but her shoulders tensed ever so slightly, as if bracing for impact that never came. Ethan nodded and returned to his food, his appetite fading. He wondered when work had become the safest place to hide a lie. Later, in bed, Lena curled toward him, resting her head on his chest. Her hair brushed his chin, and for a brief, dangerous moment, he almost believed again, almost allowed himself to sink back into the familiarity of her warmth. But then the scent reached him. That same clean sharpness, not wrong enough to accuse, not right enough to ignore. He stared at the ceiling, his heart heavy with a realization that felt final. Lena was bringing pieces of another life into their bed, and she didn't even know he could smell it. The next morning, Ethan noticed a new pattern. On days Lena claimed to be overwhelmed, stressed, emotionally drained, she was strangely meticulous about her appearance. Her makeup was more deliberate, her clothes more carefully chosen. These weren't the signs of exhaustion, they were the signs of anticipation. Ethan watched her in the mirror as she adjusted her earrings, her expression focused, almost excited. He remembered a time when she used to look like that before dates with him. The memory stung in a way he hadn't expected. "You look nice," he said quietly. She glanced at him, surprised, then smiled. "Thank you." The smile lingered a second too long, as if she were unsure who it was meant for. After she left, Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, the silence pressing in on him. He felt foolish for how long it had taken him to see the obvious. This wasn't just an emotional distance or a phase. This was a carefully maintained separation of worlds. That afternoon, he made another small adjustment. He didn't switch the shampoo this time. He simply noted its level, marked it in his mind. A quiet measurement, like tracking time on a clock you wished would stop. When Lena came home late again, Ethan was already awake. She apologized casually, kissed his cheek, and headed straight for the bathroom. He listened to the shower start, his chest tightening with each passing second. When it stopped, he waited until she fell asleep before checking. The level had dropped. The confirmation didn't come with relief. It came with grief. Ethan sat on the bathroom floor, his back against the tub, staring at the bottle in his hands. This was no longer about catching her. He already had. This was about understanding the scope of what she was doing and who she was doing it with. That was when he noticed something else. A faint trace of another scent beneath the shampoo. Something warmer, more personal. A cologne, maybe, subtle, but unmistakable once you were looking for it. His throat tightened. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was embodied. It had a smell, a presence, a shape forming just beyond his reach. Ethan didn't confront her. Not yet. He knew that once words were spoken, there would be no turning back. And some part of him needed to know everything before the final break, not for revenge, for closure. He began paying closer attention to Lena's schedule. Her late nights followed a rhythm. Now, certain days of the week, certain times, he memorized them without writing anything down, afraid of what it would mean to see it documented, afraid of how real it would look on paper. Each discovery chipped away at the version of Lena he had loved, and with it, the version of himself who believed loyalty was always reciprocated. One evening, as Lena showered, Ethan stood in the hallway, staring at the closed bathroom door. He realized then how deeply unfair the situation was. He was the one being faithful, the one telling the truth, the one honoring the commitment they had made, and yet he was the one living in uncertainty, forced into silence, forced into observation. The injustice burned quietly, fueling a resolve he could no longer deny. When Lena came out, she looked relaxed, content. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. Ethan swallowed. "Just tired." She nodded, accepting the answer easily. Too easily. As she walked away, Ethan understood something with painful clarity. The lies were no longer just present. They were comfortable, and when lies become comfortable, they become permanent, unless someone stops them. The presence of the other man didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't arrive with dramatic evidence or undeniable proof. It crept in quietly, through absences and echoes, through things that didn't belong and moments that felt borrowed. Ethan began to sense him the way you sense someone standing just behind you, close enough to feel, far enough to remain unseen. It started with the phone. Lena used to leave it anywhere on the counter, on the couch, sometimes even in the bathroom when she showered. Now it rarely left her hand. When it did, it was face down, silent, guarded. Ethan noticed how her thumb hovered over the screen when notifications appeared, how she tilted it away from him instinctively, like a reflex she hadn't yet learned to hide. One evening, as they sat together watching television, Lena's phone buzzed softly. She glanced at it and smiled before she could stop herself. It wasn't the polite smile she gave coworkers or friends. It was unfiltered, private, the kind of smile meant for one person only. Ethan felt it in his chest before he thought it through. "Who's that?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Lena looked up, startled, then smoothed her expression. "Just someone from work." The answer was too quick, too rehearsed. Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen, but he saw nothing of what was playing. The room felt suddenly crowded, as if someone else had taken a seat between them. Later that night, while Lena showered, Ethan stood in the bedroom, staring at her phone, where she'd left it on the dresser. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The silence of it was loud enough. This wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about respect, and how little of it she seemed to have left for him. The next day, Ethan noticed a change in Lena's routine. She began leaving the house earlier, dressed more carefully, her energy lighter than it had been in weeks. The contradiction was jarring. She claimed exhaustion, yet moved with anticipation. claimed stress, yet glowed with something dangerously close to excitement. And then there was the scent. It wasn't just shampoo anymore. It was layered, now something deeper beneath it. Warm, subtle, masculine. Ethan caught it on her scarf one morning, when she leaned in to kiss him goodbye. The smell didn't belong to him. He knew that, with certainty. It didn't belong to their house, their bed, their life. Someone else was close enough to leave a trace. Ethan's thoughts spiraled, but he forced himself to slow down. He didn't want assumptions. He wanted understanding. The truth, not just the shape of it. So he began to reconstruct Lena's world from the outside, paying attention to names she mentioned in passing, places she claimed to be, gaps in her stories that didn't add up. One name surfaced more often than the others. Marcus, always casually mentioned, always in a professional context, a colleague, an old contact, someone harmless enough to ignore, unless you were already listening carefully. Ethan remembered hearing the name months ago, back when things still felt normal, back when Lena spoke freely. The memory lingered now, with new weight, pressing against everything he thought he knew. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation required certainty, and Ethan was still assembling the pieces. But in his mind, the other man was beginning to take shape. Not a stranger. Someone Lena trusted. Someone close enough to blur boundaries without raising alarms. The injustice of it all settled deeper with each passing day. Ethan went to work, smiled at colleagues, carried on conversations as if his world wasn't slowly splitting in two. He honored his vows in silence, while Lena rewrote theirs in fragments and omissions. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan got up and walked through the house. He paused in the living room, then the kitchen, then finally the bathroom. He stood there for a long time, staring at the shelf, at the shampoo bottles that had started all of this. They were still, unchanged, and yet they had revealed more truth than Lena ever had. He thought about the man he was becoming, quieter, sharper, and more watchful. He didn't like it, but he understood it. Betrayal didn't just break trust, it reshaped the betrayed. The next morning, Lena announced she'd be working late again. Her tone was casual, almost apologetic. But her eyes didn't meet his. "Do you want me to wait up?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, just for a second. "No, don't worry about me." The words landed hard. "Don't worry about me," as if worry wasn't the last remaining thread holding them together. That evening, Ethan did something he had been avoiding. He checked the calendar they shared on the kitchen wall. The late nights weren't random. They clustered, predictable, intentional. The pattern matched the days Marcus's name had appeared in her conversations. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a slow ache spread through his chest. The other man was no longer a shadow. He was a presence with a rhythm, a place in Lena's life that had been carefully carved out and hidden from him. When Lena came home late that night, she smelled like the unfamiliar shampoo again. Like somewhere else. Like someone else. She kissed him softly, already drifting past him toward the bedroom. Ethan watched her walk away, a calm settling over him that surprised him with its intensity. The fear was still there, the pain too, but beneath it all was something solid. He wasn't imagining this, and whatever Lena was trying to keep in the dark was already standing in the light, whether she was ready to face it or not. Ethan stopped thinking of himself as a husband and started thinking like an observer. It wasn't a conscious shift, more a survival instinct that quietly took over. He realized that confronting Lena without understanding the full picture would only give her room to deny, deflect, or rewrite the truth. If she was living two lives, then he needed to understand the architecture of the second one before it collapsed onto the first. So he watched. Patiently, methodically, he learned the rhythm of her days the way one learns the rhythm of a city, by noticing what stayed the same and what changed without explanation. Lena's late nights followed a pattern now. Tuesdays and Thursdays were the most common. Fridays were unpredictable. Weekends were carefully protected, as if she were guarding the illusion of a normal marriage with extra effort. On the nights she stayed late, she always showered immediately when she got home. No conversation first. No sitting down. Straight to the bathroom. Door closed. Water running. It was as if she needed to wash something off before she could exist in the same space as him. Ethan noticed how she spoke differently on those nights too. Softer, kinder, almost guilty. She asked about his day, with a focus she didn't show on other evenings, as if compensating for something she couldn't admit. The contrast was painful. Her kindness felt borrowed, not genuine. He began keeping time in his head. How long she was gone. How long the shower lasted. How long before she fell asleep. These were not numbers he wanted to know, but they etched themselves into his mind anyway, uninvited and impossible to ignore. One evening, Ethan decided to test something else. He casually mentioned a work event he didn't have, suggesting he might be late the following Thursday. "Oh," Lena said, looking up from her phone. "That's okay. I'll probably be busy too." Busy. The word was becoming a catch-all, a convenient curtain drawn over whatever she didn't want to explain. Ethan nodded, his pulse steady. He wasn't surprised by the response. He was logging it. Thursday came. Ethan left the house at his usual time and returned early instead. He didn't announce himself. He parked down the street and watched the house from his car, feeling ridiculous and grimly serious at the same time. The lights were on. Lena was home, alone, for now, at 7:42 p.m. Her phone lit up inside the living room. Ethan couldn't see the screen, but he saw her reaction through the window, the way she straightened, the way her mouth curved into that private smile again. A minute later, she grabbed her bag and headed out. Ethan waited 30 seconds before following. He kept his distance, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than he realized. He wasn't chasing her. He was tracing her path. There was a difference, he told himself. Even if it felt thin, Lena drove with confidence, not the hesitant turns of someone unsure where they were going. This was familiar territory. She pulled into a parking lot near a quiet restaurant on the edge of downtown. Not crowded, not romantic in an obvious way. Discreet. Ethan parked across the street, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give him away. He watched her step out of the car. She looked different here, lighter, freer. She adjusted her jacket, checked her reflection in the window, and smiled, not the polite smile she wore at home, but the one that reached her eyes. The sight of it felt like a betrayal all on its own. Then a man approached her. Ethan didn't see his face clearly at first, just the shape of him, tall, confident, familiar in the way he moved toward her without hesitation. Lena laughed as soon as she saw him. Not softly, not carefully. She laughed the way she used to laugh with Ethan years ago, before life had dulled the edges of their happiness. The man leaned in, too close. His hand brushed her arm, lingering. Lena didn't pull away. Ethan felt something inside him fracture quietly. He stayed in the car. He didn't follow them inside. He didn't need to. The truth had already revealed itself in posture and proximity. In comfort, in ease. These were not two people crossing a line for the first time. This was practiced intimacy. Ethan drove home alone, his mind eerily calm. The shock had passed faster than he expected. What remained was clarity sharp, undeniable, and cruelly precise. When Lena returned later that night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed his cheek, asked if he'd eaten, complained lightly about traffic. Ethan listened, nodding at the right moments, amazed at how easily she slipped back into her other role. That night, as she slept, Ethan lay awake, staring into the darkness. He replayed the scene over and over, not with anger, but with a strange detachment. He studied it like evidence, like confirmation of something he had already known but needed to see with his own eyes. The other man was real, tangible, not a theory anymore. And Lena had chosen him. Ethan understood then that the investigation was no longer about whether she was cheating. That question had been answered. Now it was about understanding how deep the betrayal went and how he would reclaim himself from the wreckage it was leaving behind. He turned his head slightly, looking at Lena's sleeping face. She looked peaceful, untouched by the damage she was causing. The imbalance of it all felt unbearable. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Resolve. After that night, Ethan's senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. It was no longer just what he saw or heard. It was what he felt lingering in the air, long after Lena moved through a room. The house itself seemed to remember her absences. The couch cushion she no longer favored, the coffee mug she left untouched on mornings after her late nights, and always, unmistakably, the scent. It followed her like a quiet confession she didn't realize she was making. Ethan began to associate that unfamiliar fragrance with moments of distance. When Lena came home early, relaxed, unguarded, she smelled like home warm, faintly floral, softened by steam and familiarity. But when she came home late, energized in a way that didn't match her excuses, the sharper scent clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. It was cleaner, more assertive, not comforting, claiming. One afternoon, as they sat across from each other in the living room, Lena leaned forward to grab the remote. The movement brought her closer than she had been all day, and the scent hit him fully. Ethan's chest tightened. It wasn't just shampoo anymore. There was something else woven into it now. A cologne, subtle but deliberate, layered too carefully to be accidental. His mind searched for explanations. Even now, a coworker's hug, a shared elevator, a crowded hallway, but none of those lingered like this. None of those settled so comfortably on her. "You okay?" Lena asked suddenly, noticing his expression. "Yeah," he said, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." She nodded, accepting the answer easily, then leaned back into her space. The distance returned as if it had never left. That night, Ethan dreamed of the early years of their marriage. He saw them laughing in their first apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. Lena stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair damp from a shower, wearing one of his shirts. He remembered how she smelled then, how safe it felt. He woke with a dull ache in his chest, the contrast between memory and reality almost unbearable. In the days that followed, Ethan tested his own perceptions, without Lena ever knowing. On nights she stayed late, he casually offered to do her laundry. She declined every time. Too quickly, too firmly. On weekends, when she stayed home, she let him wash everything without hesitation. The division was clear, intentional. One morning, as Lena rushed out the door, she left her scarf behind. Ethan picked it up automatically, meaning to hang it by the door. The scent rose immediately, unmistakable and intimate. He closed his eyes, gripping the fabric, feeling something inside him finally give way. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was recognition. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, with the scarf folded in his hands, replaying the scene outside the restaurant in his mind. The way Lena's body had angled toward the other man, the ease between them, the absence of guilt in her posture. He hadn't imagined it. And now, the scent confirmed what his eyes had already seen. That man wasn't a passing mistake. He was part of her routine. The realization hurt in a quieter way than Ethan expected. There was no explosion of emotion, no dramatic collapse, just a steady, deep ache that settled into his bones. He thought about how carefully Lena separated her worlds, how she chose which version of herself to bring home. And he thought about how unfair it was that he was the one piecing together the truth while she slept peacefully beside him each night. One evening, as Lena showered, Ethan stood in the hallway again, not listening, not watching, just breathing. The scent reached him even before she stepped out. It was stronger now, less diluted by steam. He understood then that whatever was happening between her and the other man was no longer tentative. It was established, comfortable enough to leave traces she no longer bothered to erase completely. When Lena came out, she smiled at him and asked if he wanted to order takeout. Her normalcy felt surreal, like a mask worn for so long it had fused to her face. Ethan agreed, his voice steady, his heart heavy. As they ate, He studied her hands, the way her fingers moved, the way her ring caught the light. He wondered if the other man noticed it, if he cared, or if the ring was just another detail Lena had learned to compartmentalize. Later that night, Ethan stood alone in the bathroom, staring at the mirror. He leaned closer, as if searching for the man he used to be in his own reflection. He saw tired eyes, yes, but also something else. Resolve, slowly hardening. The scent had become a language he understood now. A signal, a truth Lena never intended to share. And in understanding it, Ethan felt something shift. The mystery was no longer consuming him. It was clarifying him. He knew he was nearing a breaking point. Not one marked by shouting or accusations, but by acceptance. Acceptance that the woman he loved was no longer choosing him. Acceptance that the life he had been protecting might already be gone. As he turned off the bathroom light and walked back to bed, Ethan realized something with painful clarity. The scent that haunted him wasn't just evidence of another man. It was the smell of an ending he could no longer ignore. The pieces no longer floated separately in Ethan's mind. They began to lock together, forming a shape he could no longer pretend not to see. The shampoo, the scent, the late nights, the guarded phone, the ease she showed with another man. Each detail alone had been deniable. Together, they were a confession. Lena never spoke aloud. Ethan stopped asking himself if she was cheating. That question had already exhausted itself. Now he asked something far more painful. How long had he been the only one honoring their marriage? He replayed moments from the past year with a new lens, the sudden interest in changing her routine, the unexplained irritation when he came home early, the way she once snapped at him for moving her things in the bathroom. An outburst, so out of character, he'd apologized without understanding why. Now he did. He had unknowingly disrupted a system she worked hard to maintain. One evening, Ethan decided to stop testing and start confirming. Not by following her again, not by invading her phone, but by listening to the rhythm she thought was invisible. He paid attention to the days she came home, smelling like home versus the days she didn't. He tracked it quietly, mentally, until a pattern emerged, so clear it made his stomach drop. When Lena used the unfamiliar shampoo, she always came home later than usual, always showered immediately, always slept more deeply. On the days she didn't, she was restless, distracted, emotionally distant. The realization struck him with a cold precision. She was using that shampoo for someone else, not for herself. It was part of a ritual she shared with another life. Ethan stood in the bathroom one afternoon, holding both bottles, feeling the weight of their identical shapes. One represented the life they shared or used to. The other represented the life she kept separate, protected, and hidden, and she knew exactly which one belonged where. He set them back down carefully, his hands steady. There was no doubt left to wrestle with, only acceptance. That night, as Lena slept beside him, Ethan stared into the darkness and asked himself the question he had been avoiding. If she was capable of this level of planning, this level of deception, then the betrayal wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Repeated, refined, justified. The thought hollowed him out. In the days that followed, Ethan began noticing something else, how little space there was for him in Lena's emotional world now. When something good happened at work, she shared it with someone else first. When something stressful came up, she closed herself off instead of leaning on him. He had become a placeholder in his own marriage, a stable backdrop against which she lived her real life. One evening, Ethan casually mentioned Marcus's name. "How's Marcus doing?" he asked, as if it were nothing. Lena froze for half a second, just long enough. "He's fine," she said, then forced a smile. "Why?" "No reason," Ethan replied. "You used to mention him a lot." She shrugged. "We don't really work together anymore." The lie slid out smoothly. Practiced. But Ethan had already seen them together. He knew how easily she rewrote reality when it suited her. Hearing it spoken aloud only confirmed what he already understood. She was protecting him. Not Ethan. Marcus. That night, Ethan made a quiet decision. He would stop rearranging bottles, stop setting traps, stop testing her awareness. The truth was complete now. What remained was deciding what to do with it. He didn't feel ready to confront her yet, not because he feared her reaction, but because he feared his own. He needed to face her with clarity, not desperation, with certainty, not accusation. And for that, he needed time. Time to grieve the marriage he thought he had. Time to understand how he had been reduced to an observer in his own life. Time to decide whether walking away would hurt less than staying silent. Ethan found himself thinking less about Lena and more about himself, about the man he had been before doubt crept in, about the values he had lived by: honesty, loyalty, restraint. He realized with a bitter irony that those same values were the reason she'd been able to deceive him for so long. He trusted. She exploited that trust. One morning, Ethan woke before dawn and sat alone in the kitchen, the house still and quiet. He watched the light slowly creep in through the window and felt a strange calm settle over him. The storm of uncertainty had passed. In its place was something steadier, heavier, but clearer. The truth didn't need to be chased anymore. It was already standing in front of him, and soon, whether Lena was ready or not, it would have to be acknowledged. Knowing the truth and naming it were two different things. Ethan had carried the weight of suspicion for weeks, but now the weight had a name, a face, a history that stretched further back than he wanted to admit. Marcus Hale was no longer just a shadow at the edge of his thoughts. He was real, tangible, embedded in Lena's life in ways Ethan had been deliberately kept from seeing. Ethan remembered the first time he had met Marcus, long before anything felt wrong. It had been at a company gathering Lena invited him to years ago. Marcus had been charming without trying, confident in a way that made people listen. He shook Ethan's hand firmly, held eye contact just a beat longer than necessary, and smiled like someone who always knew exactly where he stood in a room. At the time, Ethan had thought nothing of it. Marcus was just another colleague, another name among many. Now that memory felt contaminated. As Ethan replayed it, new details surfaced. The way Marcus's attention lingered on Lena when he thought no one was watching. The familiarity in their banter that went beyond professional ease. Ethan had noticed it then, faintly, and dismissed it because trust had made him generous to a fault. That generosity felt foolish now. Ethan began quietly gathering what he could not evidence in a legal sense, but understanding. He searched Lena's old social media posts, noticing how Marcus appeared in the background more often than he remembered. Group photos, office outings, casual captions that now felt loaded with subtext. Marcus was always there. Close, but never obvious, close enough to build something unnoticed. The injustice of it tightened around Ethan's chest. This wasn't a sudden affair born of opportunity. It was a slow burn, a gradual erosion, a connection allowed to grow unchecked because Ethan trusted both of them. One evening, while Lena was out again, Ethan drove past the restaurant where he had seen them together. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. Just being there was enough. The place felt wrong to him now, like a landmark of loss. He sat in his car, watching couples come and go, wondering how many of them were sharing secrets just as easily. When Lena came home later that night, she looked lighter than she had all week, relaxed, fulfilled. Ethan noticed how she hummed softly as she set her bag down, how she moved through the house as if she belonged fully to herself again. "You seem in a good mood," he said. She smiled. "It was a productive day," he nodded, the word productive echoing bitterly in his mind. Productive at dismantling a marriage, productive at lying without flinching. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He lay beside her, staring into the dark, thinking about Marcus, about how easily another man had stepped into a space Ethan had protected for years, about how Lena had made room for him without making room for the truth. By morning, Ethan felt something solidify inside him. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was resolved. He decided he would see Marcus again. Not as a shadow, not from a distance. He needed to understand the man who had so easily replaced him in his own life. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A few days later, Lena mentioned a company event happening downtown. Casual, optional. She said it without looking at him, as if already assuming his disinterest. "I might stop by," Ethan said calmly. Her head snapped up. "Really?" "Yeah," he replied. "It's been a while since I met your coworkers." For a moment, panic flickered across her face before she masked it with a smile. Sure, that could be. Nice. The word nice hung between them, fragile and unconvincing. At the event, Ethan spotted Marcus almost immediately. He was exactly as Ethan remembered, well-dressed, relaxed, effortlessly at ease. Marcus laughed easily, touching Lena's arm when he spoke to her, his familiarity unmistakable now that Ethan knew how to read it. When Marcus noticed Ethan approaching, something shifted, just slightly, recognition, followed by calculation. "Ethan," Marcus said, extending a hand. "It's been a while." Ethan took it. The grip was firm, confident, too confident it has. They exchanged pleasantries, the kind that skim the surface while hiding everything beneath. Ethan watched Marcus closely, the way his eyes tracked Lena, even when speaking to others, the way he stood a little too close, as if daring anyone to challenge his claim. Lena looked tense, trapped between two realities she had worked hard to keep separate. Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him. Seeing Marcus in the open stripped him of his power. This wasn't a monster. This was a man who had taken advantage of opportunity and secrecy. A man who had been allowed too much access for too long. As the night wore on, Ethan observed without intervening. He didn't need to confront Marcus. Not yet. He already knew enough. The truth wasn't hidden in words. It was written in body language, in glances exchanged, in the ease of shared silence. When they left, Lena was unusually quiet. Ethan didn't ask why. He didn't need to. The illusion had cracked, and she knew it. On the drive home, the silence between them was heavy, charged with everything unsaid. Ethan stared ahead, his reflection faint in the windshield, thinking about how betrayal often thrived not on passion, but on permission. Lena had given Marcus permission, and she had denied Ethan the dignity of truth. As they pulled into the driveway, Ethan understood something with absolute clarity. The story was no longer about discovering the affair. That chapter was closed. What came next would be about consequences. The house felt different after that night. Not quieter, not colder, just exposed. As if every wall had shifted slightly, revealing the thinness of what remained. Ethan moved through the space with a new awareness, conscious of how easily the truth had been hidden in plain sight. Lena felt it too. Her movements were more careful now, her smiles tighter, her questions more frequent. She knew something had changed, even if she didn't yet know how much. Ethan didn't rush. He understood now that patience was his advantage. Lena had spent months, maybe longer, controlling information, shaping perception, deciding what he was allowed to know. He wouldn't confront her until there was no room left for denial. Not for her, not for himself. He returned to the bathroom late one afternoon, the light slanting through the window, dust visible in the air. The shampoo bottles waited on the shelf, mundane and damning. He picked them up, weighing them in his hands, and felt an unexpected calm. This wasn't paranoia. It was procedure. Ethan switched them again, carefully, deliberately. This time, he added one more detail. He wiped the outside of the unfamiliar bottle clean and lightly dusted the cap with powder from the cabinet. Not enough to be visible, just enough to hold a fingerprint. It felt absurd, theatrical even, but he needed certainty that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or memory. When Lena came home that evening, she greeted him with forced cheer. She talked about traffic, about a coworker's joke, about nothing at all. Ethan listened, nodding, offering short responses. He didn't look at the bottles. He didn't need to yet. She showered later than usual, humming softly as the water ran. Ethan sat on the bed, hands folded, heart steady in a way that surprised him. He felt like a witness to his own life, detached but present. When she came out, she kissed him and went straight to her phone. Ethan waited until she fell asleep. The bathroom light cast a pale glow as he checked the shelf. The unfamiliar bottle had been moved, used. He turned it slightly and saw it, the faint smear where the powder had been disturbed. A fingerprint, partial but undeniable. He sat on the edge of the tub, the weight of the moment settling over him. This wasn't about shampoo anymore. It was about choice, about a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. About how far she was willing to go to preserve a lie. Ethan didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes when the last illusion finally gives way. He realized then that the act of proving the betrayal had been more draining than the betrayal itself. Doubt had consumed him. Certainty, strangely, brought relief. The next morning, Lena moved through the house with a cautious politeness that bordered on anxiety. She asked if he wanted coffee, if he needed anything from the store, if everything was okay. Ethan answered calmly, kindly. He wasn't ready yet, not until the moment felt right. That moment came sooner than he expected. That evening, Lena mentioned she'd be late again. The words were casual, but her eyes searched his face for something: permission, maybe, or forgiveness she hadn't earned. Okay, Ethan said. She hesitated. Are you sure? He met her gaze. I'm sure. She left quickly after that, the tension trailing behind her like a shadow. Ethan waited an hour, then another. He didn't follow this time. He didn't need to. He knew where she was going. He knew who she was with. Instead, he prepared. He gathered the shampoo bottles and set them on the kitchen counter, side by side. He placed the scarf she'd forgotten days ago beside them, the one that still carried another man's scent. He sat at the table and waited. When Lena returned, the house was quiet. Too quiet. She paused in the doorway, sensing the shift. Ethan was seated at the table, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. What's going on? She asked. Sit down, he said gently. Her eyes flicked to the counter, to the bottles, to the scarf. Color drained from her face. I need you to tell me the truth, Ethan continued, his voice steady. Not the version that protects you, the real one. Lena opened her mouth, then closed it. She laughed weakly. Ethan, this is ridiculous. You're making something out of nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply turned the unfamiliar bottle toward her, pointing to the disturbed cap. You used this tonight? You used it every time you came home late. You've been careful, too careful. She stared at the bottle as if it might speak for her. And this, he added, lifting the scarf, it doesn't belong to me. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Lena's shoulders sagged. The performance finally slipped. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly, but it did. Tears filled her eyes. She spoke about loneliness, about feeling unseen, about how it started small and grew before she knew how to stop it. Ethan listened without interruption, his heart aching but clear. None of it excused the deception. None of it justified the choices. When she finally fell silent, Ethan spoke. I would have faced anything with you if you had let me. But you didn't. You chose secrecy. You chose him. Lena reached for his hand. Ethan gently pulled away. The truth was out now, fully, finally. And with it came a stillness that felt like the end of a long, painful night. The silence that followed her confession was heavier than any argument could have been. It pressed down on Ethan's chest, not with shock, but with finality. This was the moment he had been moving toward for weeks, and yet standing in it felt unreal, like watching the last scene of a movie he had lived inside for too long. Lena sat across from him, her hands trembling in her lap. Tears streaked down her face, unchecked, messy. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence she carried so effortlessly with Marcus. Ethan noticed that, and the observation brought him no satisfaction, only a dull ache. "How long?" he asked quietly. She swallowed. "Almost a year." The words landed slowly, each one carving its own space in his chest. Almost a year. A year of lies folded into daily life. A year of coming home to him after being with someone else. A year of him loving her honestly while she rationed the truth. "And you never thought to tell me?" he asked. "I was scared," she said quickly. "I didn't want to hurt you." Ethan let out a short, breathless laugh. It surprised them both. "You didn't want to hurt me," he repeated, not unkindly. "So you let me live in a lie." She flinched. "I kept telling myself I'd end it," Lena continued, her voice breaking. "Every time, I just couldn't." Ethan studied her face, the desperation, the regret that came too late. He believed that she was sorry now. He just understood, with painful clarity, that it didn't change anything. "You ended us long before tonight," he said. "You just didn't tell me." Lena shook her head. "I never stopped loving you." The sentence hung in the air. Fragile and insufficient, Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. "Love doesn't look like this," he said softly. "Love doesn't hide. It doesn't make someone doubt their reality." She reached for him again, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "Please," she whispered, "we can fix this." Ethan gently but firmly pulled away. The motion felt like severing something that had already been dying. "I've been fixing this alone for months," he said, "questioning myself, watching you, wondering what I did wrong." "Do you know what that does to a person?" Lena cried openly now, her composure completely gone. Ethan felt the pull to comfort her, a reflex built over years. But he didn't move. He understood that stepping into that role again would cost him something he could no longer afford. "What about him?" Ethan asked. "Does he know about me?" She hesitated. Ethan nodded. "That's what I thought." She looked up, shame flooding her expression. "He knows you exist. He just didn't think you mattered anymore." The cruelty of that statement cut deeper than anything else she had said, not because Marcus believed it, but because Lena had allowed him to. Ethan stood up slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. He felt strangely calm, like the storm had already passed and left nothing but wreckage behind. "I'm done," he said. Lena's head snapped up. "Ethan." "I'm done," he repeated. "With lies, with explanations, with being an afterthought in my own marriage." She stood too, panicked now. "You can't just walk away." "I didn't," he said evenly. "You did, a long time ago." He moved past her toward the bedroom. The act of packing felt surreal. He folded clothes mechanically, his hands steady even as his chest burned. Lena hovered in the doorway, pleading, apologizing, promising everything she should have offered before it was too late. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't ask for more answers. The truth had already taken enough from him. As he zipped his bag, Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Where will you go?" Ethan paused, considering the question. "Somewhere I'm not lied to." He walked out of the bedroom, then the house, without looking back. The night air was cool against his skin, grounding him in a way the house never had in recent months. He stood on the porch for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the reality settle. This was the moment of no return. Driving away, Ethan expected to feel devastation. Instead, what he felt was emptiness wide, quiet, and oddly clean. The ache was still there, but it was no longer tangled with doubt. Pain, he realized, was easier to carry than uncertainty. Later that night, alone in a borrowed room, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone. Messages from Lena filled the screen. Apologies, explanations, pleas. He turned the phone face down. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt honest. And as exhaustion finally pulled him under, Ethan understood something that would take him a long time to fully accept. The worst part wasn't discovering the betrayal. It was surviving it and choosing himself anyway. Morning came without ceremony. No alarms, no familiar sounds from the house he used to call home. Ethan woke in the small guest room he had borrowed from an old friend, staring at a ceiling he didn't recognize, his body heavy with the kind of fatigue that sleep couldn't touch. For a moment, there was confusion then. Memory rushed back in, sharp and unforgiving. He didn't reach for his phone right away. He already knew what he would find. When he finally did, the screen lit up with a flood of messages. Lena's name filled it, apologies stacked on top of each other, long paragraphs followed by short, panicked ones, missed calls, voicemails he didn't open. Ethan scrolled without reading, then set the phone down again. He wasn't ready to absorb her pain. He was still learning how to survive his own. What surprised him was the message that came an hour later from an unknown number. Ethan stared at it for a long time before opening it. It was Marcus. The text was brief, almost formal. He said he needed to talk. Said there had been misunderstandings. Said Ethan deserved an explanation. Ethan felt a slow, cold anger rise, not explosive, not blinding, but focused. This was the man who had stepped into his life quietly, who had benefited from his trust without ever earning it. And now he wanted to explain. Ethan replied with a single word, fine. They met that afternoon at a quiet cafe far from Lena's office, far from anywhere that carried shared memories. Marcus was already there when Ethan arrived, seated near the window, posture relaxed in a way that felt rehearsed. He stood as Ethan approached, offering a hand. Ethan ignored it and sat down. Marcus cleared his throat. I didn't plan for things to go this far. Ethan looked at him steadily. You planned enough. Marcus shifted, clearly unsettled by the lack of emotion in Ethan's voice. Lena told me things were over between you, that you were basically roommates. Ethan almost laughed. And you never thought to hear that from me. Marcus hesitated. I trusted her. The irony was suffocating. You trusted a woman who was lying to her husband? Ethan said calmly. That says more about you than you realize, Marcus bristled. I'm not the villain here. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. You knew she was married. Everything after that was a choice. Silence stretched between them. Marcus broke eye contact first. I didn't think it would hurt you like this, he muttered. Ethan felt something shift. Then, not closure, but clarity. Marcus wasn't remorseful. He was uncomfortable. There was a difference. You didn't think about me at all, Ethan said. And that's the problem. He stood up, leaving money on the table. Whatever story you tell yourself to sleep at night, keep me out of it. Marcus didn't stop him. When Ethan walked back onto the street, the air felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because one more illusion had been stripped away. Marcus wasn't a mystery anymore. He was just a man who had taken what was offered and walked away when the cost became visible. That evening, Ethan returned to the house one last time. While Lena was at work, he didn't announce himself. He didn't linger. He packed the rest of his things with quiet efficiency. Each room felt smaller than he remembered, like it had already started erasing him. In the bathroom, the shampoo bottles still sat on the shelf. Ethan paused there longer than he meant to. He picked them up, turning them in his hands, remembering how something so insignificant had revealed everything. He left them where they were and walked away without a second glance. When Lena came home and found the house half empty, she called him immediately. This time, Ethan answered. It's really over, isn't it? She asked, her voice barely holding together. Yes, he said simply. I lost everything, she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes. You gave it up, she cried then, openly, brokenly. Ethan listened in silence, not to punish her, but because this was the last kindness he could afford. I hope one day you understand what you did, he said quietly. Not to me, to yourself. He hung up before she could respond. In the weeks that followed, consequences rippled outward. Lena's relationship with Marcus didn't survive the exposure. What thrived in secrecy collapsed under reality. At work, whispers followed her. Trust eroded. The confidence she once carried fractured, replaced by something brittle and uncertain. Ethan watched none of it directly. He heard pieces through mutual friends, through silence where connection used to be, and he felt no satisfaction in it, only distance. He moved into a small apartment across town, sparse and clean. He bought new shampoo without thinking about it, new towels, new routines. Some nights were unbearable. Others were quiet in a way that felt almost peaceful. Healing, he learned, wasn't dramatic. It was slow, uneven, built out of ordinary moments where he chose not to look back. And little by little, the weight he had carried for so long began to lift. Time has a way of revealing what drama hides. In the weeks after Ethan left, the silence that followed him was louder than any argument had ever been. It settled into his new apartment, slowly, filling the empty corners, the unfamiliar rooms, the spaces where memories hadn't yet formed. At first, the quiet felt punishing. Then, gradually, it became honest. Ethan rebuilt his life in small, deliberate pieces. He woke up when his body told him to, not when obligation demanded it. He cooked simple meals. He walked in the evenings without destination, letting the city blur past him. There were nights when the loneliness hit hard, when he reached instinctively for his phone, forgetting for a moment that the person he used to call no longer existed in the way he needed her to. On those nights, the pain came in waves. But it passed. It always passed. Lena's world, on the other hand, began collapsing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Marcus disappeared first, not dramatically, not with a confrontation. He simply withdrew, the way men like him often do, when secrecy is no longer an option. Without the thrill of hiding, without the safety of lies, the connection lost its appeal. His messages became shorter, his excuses more frequent. Until one day, they stopped altogether. Lena told herself she deserved better. That Marcus had used her, that she had been vulnerable, but the mirror offered no comfort. Every justification led back to the same truth she had avoided for too long. She had chosen this. Repeatedly, at work, things changed too. The whispers were subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Colleagues who once trusted her instincts began questioning her judgment. Opportunities dried up. Invitations disappeared. Reputation, she learned too late, was fragile, and once cracked, it never returned to its original shape. She reached out to Ethan again, then again, and again. Long messages filled with regret and reflection. She spoke about therapy, about understanding her patterns, about finally seeing the damage she had caused. Ethan read none of it, not because he lacked empathy, but because reopening that door would cost him the progress he had fought for. The real price of betrayal, Ethan realized, wasn't punishment, it was consequence. Lena lost the life she had taken for granted. The stability, the safety, the man who had loved her without conditions. She was left with the knowledge that when given the chance to choose honesty, she had chosen comfort instead. And comfort, unlike truth, never lasts. Ethan didn't celebrate her downfall. There was no satisfaction in it. He felt only distance, a quiet separation that allowed him to breathe again. He learned that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, and closure didn't require conversation. Sometimes, walking away was the most complete ending possible. One afternoon, months later, Ethan stood in the aisle of a grocery store, staring at shelves lined with shampoo bottles. For a brief moment, the memory returned: the bathroom, the scent, the realization that had changed everything. He felt it pass through him like an echo, faint but recognizable. He picked one, without hesitation, and moved on. That was how he knew he was healing. The injustice that once burned inside him had cooled into something steadier, a self-respect he had nearly lost. He no longer questioned his worth. He no longer replayed conversations, searching for mistakes. He understood now that loyalty was not something you earn by being perfect. It was something freely given or freely withheld. And when it was withheld, it was never the fault of the one who stayed faithful. Ethan learned to trust again, slowly, not in others at first, but in himself, in his instincts, in his ability to walk away from what harmed him. The betrayal had scarred him, yes, but it had also clarified him. It taught him that love without honesty was just another form of loneliness. Some nights, he thought of Lena not with anger, but with a distant sadness, not for what she had done to him, but for what she had done to herself. She had lost someone who would have stood beside her through anything, and that was a loss she would carry far longer than he would. Ethan turned off the light in his apartment, the city humming softly outside. He lay down, breathing evenly, unafraid of the quiet. The price had been paid. And this time, it wasn't him who was left in the dark. Betrayal rarely announces itself with dramatic confessions. More often, it hides in small details, quiet changes, and instincts we're taught to ignore. This story isn't just about infidelity, it's about self-trust. About what happens when someone gives their loyalty freely, only to discover it was never protected on the other side. The deepest lesson here is not that love can fail, but that truth always leaves traces, and ignoring them costs us far more than facing them. Healing doesn't come from revenge or explanations that arrive too late. It comes from choosing yourself when staying would mean shrinking, doubting, and slowly disappearing. Walking away is not weakness. Sometimes, it's the bravest act of self-respect you'll ever make, when you honor your worth, even after being broken. If you don't lose love, you make space for a healthier one to exist. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever trusted your instincts when something felt wrong? And if you want more powerful stories about betrayal, healing, and finding strength again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.